this paper is by myself as well as Wade Katz, and a lot of the impetus for the work is actually because of the early work that Wade Katz did in the 1980s in Wilmington. So paper title is Echoes of Rebellion, Cultural Reverberation of the 1790s St. Domingue Rebellion in the Delaware Valley. From Philadelphia to Dover, the lower Delaware Valley's Afro-Caribbean population, both free and enslaved, is a frequently overlooked yet important component of the microregion's cultural history. The historical and archaeological study of the region's Afro-Caribbean population underscores a strong mercantile connection to Delaware Valley ports, Delaware Valley ports, notably Philadelphia and Wilmington, with English, French, and Dutch Caribbean colonies, and the interconnected relationships and struggles for freedom, equality, and self-determination between Black Caribbean communities and those in and around Philadelphia. These relationships became socially and culturally intertwined in the 1790s following the successful rebellion against white enslavers by Black St. Domingueans that eventually led to the formation of Haiti by 1804. The rebellion resulted in the immigration of over 2,000 white enslavers, dozens of free French Blacks, and over 800 enslaved young, mostly 9 to 29-year-old Afro-Caribbeans to Philadelphia as refugees. Some refugees arrived by way of an interim location, such as Martinique. In Wilmington, Delaware, I know this is not a slide of Wilmington, it's Ferry Street, or excuse me, Arch Street in Philly, but you kind of get the gist. It's estimated that between 300 and 400 refugees located to that port, Wilmington, by 1794. Infants were left behind, and those over 30 likely fled to fight. Prior to and after the rebellion, Afro-Caribbeans had been sold in nearby ports at both Philadelphia and Wilmington. For some, forced relocation with slaveholders to Philadelphia delayed or even prevented their ability to break from the shackles of captivity. For others, freedom was granted in repayment for assistance in fleeing the French colony. Freedom for many was also aided through alliances with the local Black community and the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society, or PAS. For others, a rebellion 1,400 miles to the south on a distant French island colony instilled greater hope in the success of their own nonviolent revolution and in laying the foundation for institutions built by and for Black community members. The rebellion by Black St. Domingueans, which lasted from 1791 until 1804, was unique. It was the first revolution by enslaved and free Blacks in the American Atlantic that resulted in complete collapse of white colonialism in a locality, the establishment of universal freedom within a nation, and self-rule for the nation's people. For white populations in the United States, many of whom resided in communities were enslaved, and in the case of the northern states, free Blacks held the demographic majority. The St. Domingue Rebellion was a realization of the resistance power that disenfranchised and dehumanized Black communities could wield toward dismantling white oppression. It struck fear in white enslavers' minds that their power hold was in jeopardy. In the Philadelphia area, oppression resistance was largely nonviolent, and social gains were aided by alliances with influential Black and some white community and religious leaders. White refugees arriving in Philadelphia caused setbacks to that relationship as local philanthropic and federal funds were reallocated to financially aid the displaced white refugees at the expense of the existing local Black community members. These actions set a new tone and agenda, forcing the Black community to abandon frail alliances with white allies for social change and focus continued efforts on forging their own path forward, such as Richard Allen's creation of the African American Methodist Episcopal Church in 1794. Loopholes in the August 29, 1793 National Convention decree in Paris for abolishing slavery in the northern province of St. Domingue, as well as Pennsylvania's own 1780 Gradual Emancipation Act, enabled many white enslaver refugees to keep transported laborers captive while residing in Pennsylvania. Others moved to northern Delaware, where no such abolition laws ever existed. Educated as a body politic and determined to rebel against oppression, Black community members rallied to aid in securing legal freedom for as many French Black slaves as possible. Many of those freed eventually returned to St. Domingo, though those who lacked financial means or found other compelling reasons to relocate to the Delaware Valley remained. Aspects of Black French enslavement and local ideological and social Black rebellion are evident in the archaeological deposits in the lower Delaware Valley from this period, revealing how the connections with the St. Domingo Revolution reverberated through the American Atlantic. Now, I just want to point out too that these two port cities, Wilmington and Philadelphia, were not the only locations where refugees escaped to. They went all the way up and down the eastern seaboard, particularly the southern states. These connections are most evident in the form of imported Caribbean-made colonware. This ware was produced as low-fired hand-built pottery that is coiled, molded, or slab constructed, or as wheel-thrown in low to high-fired vessels, depending on manufacturer location. While hand-built colonware was produced throughout the Caribbean and up and down the eastern United States, as far north as Maryland, wheel-thrown vessel production was largely limited to Barbados, Jamaica, Antigua, St. Lucia, Martinique, Santo Domingo, and other French colonies. Wheel-thrown pottery predominated among coarse earthenwares in Barbados, which did not develop the slab-produced and African-influenced pottery-making tradition prevalent on many other Caribbean islands. Instead, enslaved laborers there tended to produce European pottery forms for industry use, such as sugar molds and molasses drip jars, but other vessel forms were also likely made. On Martinique, handmade and wheel-thrown vessels were made for both industrial and domestic purposes. Regardless of the production method, these coarse earthenwares were unglazed. Archaeological evidence suggests Caribbean-produced colonware made its way up to the Delaware Valley and other northern states in limited amounts, likely by way of relocated French Black enslaved laborers who carried the wares in haste with others as they were forced to relocate and flee the island. To paraphrase A. Milne's eponymous Winnie the Pooh, and certainly not to trivialize the horror and disruption the fighting caused, the wares were, quote, useful pots to put things in, end quote, while escaping St. Domingo. The refugees may have continued to use these pots in the lower Delaware Valley setting to recreate Afro-Caribbean cuisines like pepper pot. Some pots may have also been acquired by members of the local Black community, as appears to have been the case with the Cooper family of Dover, Delaware. Was such an exchange a way to use and display the visibly distinct ware as a symbol or perhaps a memento of Black rebellion and resistance against marginalization? We don't know, but it's an important question to ask. Few sites in the Delaware Valley have yielded colonware or Caribbean coarse earthenware, and no colonware production sites have been identified in the state, unlike in Maryland and states further south. Recovery of colonware in Delaware is therefore exceptional and worth particular note, especially when found in sites and in deposits that date to the period of the Caribbean refugee relocation, and those sites associated with free or enslaved Afro-Caribbeans linked to or unconnected with the revolt. Such archaeological correlates were first made in the late 1980s in Wilmington, Delaware by Wade Katz and others. There, excavations of 3 house lots on block 1191 encountered 7 privies and 2 trash pits, of which 4 features yielded colonware. 62 fragments were found representing about 4 vessels, one with a globular shape, flared rim, and no neck. Here's an example of one of them. A privy at the Mendenhall site on nearby block 1101 yielded a nearly intact globular-shaped colonware vessel with a flaring rim and no neck. The deposits contained in the colonware date from 1795 to 1799, coinciding with the influx of refugees from St. Domingo to the city. Katz initially recognized that the pace and temper characteristics are unlike colonwares found in more southern states, and hypothesized then that the recovered wares from block 1191 were likely produced in the Caribbean. In 1995, petrographic analysis of the pot found in the Mendenhall Privy strongly suggests it was produced in northern Haiti. An advertisement from Thomas Mendenhall in 1793 for a black man named David, enslaved by Madame Lavaud, strongly suggests his and the site's connection to both people. Mendenhall may have leased the parcel to Lavaud or housed Lavaud and her labor as guests in his home. Recovery of the pot in Mendenhall's privy strongly suggests the presence of an Afro-Caribbean laborer, perhaps David or another captive, at his Wilmington home. The vessel's recovery and the petrographic analysis also reveals that refugees did not arrive in the lower Delaware Valley empty-handed. Rather, they relocated with some goods, including possibly earthenware pots, as evidenced here. The Block 1191 occupants' identities cannot be determined, but archaeological evidence also suggests enslaved labor occupants. The recovered pottery not only represents items associated with enslaved Afro-Caribbeans and the translocation of French Black material culture, but also the African Caribbean cultural traditions in the lower Delaware Valley. Indeed, the recovery of abundant fish remains, a staple in enslaved Black diets on St. Domingo, strongly suggests continued culinary practices among French Blacks in the Delaware Valley, an element that archaeologists should continue to explore and cite assemblages. We know that the Caribbean dish known as pepper pot was commonly prepared and sold by Black vendors in the Philadelphia area. German artist John Krimmel immortalized the cuisine and a female vendor in his 1811 painting titled Pepper Pot, a scene in the Philadelphia market, which you can see here in the center. Further south in Dover, Delaware, archaeological data recovery of a 1770s to 1820s farmstead associated with the free Black Cooper family recovered the base of a large wheel-thrown, high-fired, unglazed columnware pot from the bottom of a well. Richard Cooper, born enslaved in Barbados in 1730s, and eventually sold to a Central Delaware family, gained his freedom in 1777 from the Quaker Hanson family. In case anybody doesn't know where Dover is, here's a slide showing Dover in the center of the state. But it also shows the northern Mid-Atlantic, which is the darker gray area in the center of the screen. And we're seeing cultural behaviors much different than what we do in the southern portion of the Mid-Atlantic, which you can see in light gray, where West Virginia, and Maryland are located. Richard and his wife, Nanny, received their life rights to a small parcel of land where they created a bustling farmstead, raising animals on poorly drained land. And the life rights are just that. They have the ability to occupy the land rent-free, construct buildings on it, and use it as they desire. But once they die, the land reverts back to the original owner. So it creates an issue of generational wealth building opportunities for this family, which is likely the same situation that occurred with many other Black families of this time in Delaware. In 1801, Nanny died. Let me just show you how we interpreted the reconstruction of the farmstead based on archaeological data. In 1801, Nanny died, and in 1805, Richard was formally accepted as a Quaker. In May 1811, their son, Aaron, was abducted by whites and sold to a cotton planter in Natchez, Mississippi. After a lengthy court battle, Aaron gained his freedom in 1814 and reunited with his wife Hetty and their daughters back in Delaware. Earlier in his life, Aaron was indentured to a miller near Wilmington as late as 1792 and 1793, and following his indenture, met Hetty in Philadelphia, to whom he wed. His time near Wilmington and Philadelphia coincided with the St. Domingo refugee resettlement, and both Aaron and Hetty would have been quite aware of the boat's arrivals. In fact, this was made national headlines at the time, so anybody in the region, in the Delaware Valley area, but also in the more southern states, would have been quite aware of what was going on in Haiti, or what became Haiti. Perhaps Aaron and Hetty interacted with enslaved refugees in Philadelphia or northern Delaware and acquired the Caribbean coarse earthenware, which is shown here. Acquired the Caribbean coarse earthenware vessel found that later made its way into the Cooper family well. Alternatively, Richard Cooper himself may have interacted with and directly acquired the vessel from French Black refugees who settled in Delaware. So Richard Cooper was a fairly well-known individual in central Delaware who had networking ties with individuals in the northern part of the state as well. The recovered wheel-thrown vessel is likely part of a vessel made in Barbados, Jamaica, Antigua, St. Lucia, Martinique, perhaps Santo Domingo, or another French colony, and imported to Delaware. Similar in paste to Barbadian redware, this connection has not been confirmed through petrological or mineralogical analysis of the Cooper family's vessel, but it is something that we would like to do at some point. And this vessel is currently being curated at the Delaware State Museum. The presence of the Caribbean colonware, or the possible Caribbean colonware, in the Cooper's assemblage evinces the spread of market products from the Caribbean to the lower Delaware Valley, and the likely transfer of ideas and communication networks between disparate and distant Black populations. Such networks enable the spread of ideas, news, know-how, monetary and material culture exchanges, avenues of escape, modes of defiance, and of rebellion. For the Coopers, the Caribbean colonware may have served as a physical reminder of Richard Cooper's Caribbean birthplace and of the Black rebellion against the oppression African diasporic peoples faced at the time. If acquired from French Black refugees, it's possible that owning, using, and even displaying the Caribbean core circumware as a memento may have been a vehicle for instilling hope for universal Black emancipation and the power of Black rebellion, even if conducted as a social and religious rebellion, such as that of Richard Allen's AME Church in Philadelphia. Indeed, Richard Cooper's own formal admittance as a Black Quaker was uncommon at the time. In the face of obstacles posed by white society, Richard had unabashedly forged a path to persevere and demand inclusivity and equality. So you can see here that as a Quaker, he may be engaging in passive resistance techniques, possibly. There remains much archaeologists can and must learn about free and enslaved Afro-Caribbean historic lives in the lower Delaware Valley to better understand the nuanced complexities of cultural traditions and practices such individuals brought to the microregion. The two sites discussed here and their connections with the Caribbean cultural material and revolution are hopefully the first of many such sites to better enable the study of this oft overlooked population. Through such sites, we may be able to better contextualize Afro-Caribbean experiences and the ways they navigated a racialized landscape, signaled varied identities as Black Americans, developed strategies of resilience, and built social support networks necessary for self-determination, community formation, and oppression resistance. Thanks.